Tell me a little bit about some of the darkness of Prince Andrew.
Well, we know a certain amount about his links with Jeffrey Epstein and his activities there, and the accusations have been made to him by Virginia Giuffre. But I'm finding, as I do my research, that in some ways the darker material is his links with various businessmen who he took on his trips when he was a publicly paid trade envoy. And I'm concentrating my book on exactly what he was doing on these trips, which are financed by the taxpayer, and if he was lining his own pocket while he was meant to be drumming up business for Britain.
Wow. Okay, so those are the two sides of Andrew. And then I think there's a third that I find really interesting, which is just his personality. We've talked a bit before about this, but, the teddy bears, the getting staff to do curtains and things like that. And then, of course, his wife. And I think we can talk about all of those aspects, or his ex-wife and remarrying wife. What are some of the allegations that we spoke about last time just around Andrew on Epstein?
Well, I mean, he gave this famous interview to Newsnight in November 2019. And in so many of the things that he said in that, I mean, one were immaterial to the case that was being made against him. But the other thing is that so many of these things have been shown not to be true. I mean, he's been pictured sweating at the time that he met Virginia Giuffre running out of nightclubs. He claimed that he'd only seen Epstein at a particular time, and then the records have now emerged that he carried on seeing him even after he was meant to have sort of broken the relationship. So, in some ways, it's very difficult to know what to believe. I mean, the alibi of being down at the Pizza Express in Woking, which could easily be solved by looking at the logs at Buckingham Palace. The policeman who was on duty with him has asked for those logs to be released. I understand the logs would show that he did go back to Buckingham Palace that night, and it would cause a bit of a fuss because he wasn't actually due to be in Buckingham Palace that night. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that he could have done to clear his name, and he hasn't. And of course, he's been chased by lawyers and others in the States, not as a necessarily someone, as a person of interest, someone they should talk to who was a witness. And he's refused to go. He's refused to talk to them. He's refused to answer questions. And you've got to wonder, why is he behaving like this? Why did he pay this woman so much money, the woman he claims never to have met? So that's one element. And then clearly, as you say, there's the element of his whole general behavior. And I think one of the problems is he made very few friends on the way up, and now he's weakened. He hasn't got many supporters apart from his ex-wife.
That thing about Pizza Express, do royals just sit in Pizza Express? I've never seen that. Is that something that happens somewhere like Pizza Express?
Well, I mean, it was a children's birthday party. He might well have gone. I think he went to pick up the daughter. But also, you can go from Woking from a children's party in the afternoon to a nightclub in London at 9 o'clock quite quickly. So it was never really a very convincing excuse anyway. And the people claim that they can't remember seeing him there. There's a diary entry showing that he was going to a manicurist that afternoon. I mean, that's quite interesting in itself. I mean, you talk about his love of teddy bears, and as whom not many men go to a manicurist on a Saturday afternoon.
Right.
So, there are a lot of questions that could easily be cleared up. And he hasn't been totally honest. And I think, like a lot of these stories, the cover-up gets worse than the original sin. Well, I mean, what I would say about Epstein is, there are clearly a lot of female victims. A lot of them have signed NDAs. A lot of them are now married women with children. They don't want the publicity. But, we have got depositions still to be opened. I mean, there may be people who may still emerge. There are court cases still going on. I mean, they're all suing each other for various reasons.
Really?
Various people suing Virginia Giuffre for libel and all sorts of stuff. So I suspect, and this is how things do emerge from the court cases, that there may be further disclosures, and that must be what worries Prince Andrew, and indeed a whole series of other people, because clearly other names have come into the frame: Richard Branson, Bill Clinton, Trump. And, I suspect the lawyers have tried to keep those names out of the papers. But, there's only so much you can do if they're court records which are released.
Is he still an active member of the royal family in any sense? Because they're in a bit of a dire straits, really, through illness. Obviously, Kate, Charles, Harry and Meghan are gone. There's sort of, who's left?
Well, it was very interesting, his appearance at the funeral for the King of Greece, because there he was, in effect, leading the mourners. So he was sitting at the front. And so is that a family occasion or is that a state occasion? I mean, it was filmed. It's written about. So he's sort of half in, half out. And I think he's constantly pushing to see if he can get more in. And I think we had that moment, for example, at Sandringham at Christmas, where both Fergie and he were in the lineup. Again, a very public occasion. They would say a family occasion, but in the past, various people like Fergie have been kept out of sight. So, and there must have been worries that people would shout out and say things. It'd be all rather embarrassing. Mm-hmm. So I think they're constantly pushing just to see how far they can take him. I mean, he's not lost his Knight of the Garter, which he could easily have taken away with a stroke of a pen. He retains certain titles, which were given to him by his mother after these accusations with Epstein emerged. So she was basically giving everyone two fingers, saying, "I'll do what I want with my son." Taking away his dukedom of York leads parliamentary legislation, so that's more difficult. But no, he's still around, and I think the thing is, he's now not a public servant. There's less scrutiny of what he's up to in terms of his business activities, and so all the contacts that he made during that decade as a trade envoy, he's calling in those favors, and there's nothing really that anyone can do to keep an eye on him. He's flying in private planes. It's all done behind the scenes, nominee accounts, different names in the bank accounts. Very, very difficult to actually tell what he's up to.
King Charles, I remember saying he wanted to have a stripped back royal family, a smaller family, I suppose. So what does it mean that Andrew's still, in some sense, there, even after his disgrace?
Well, I think the feeling was that the royal family was costing a lot of money. There were a lot of people there who seemed not to be carrying their weight. And I support the slimmed down monarchy. I think, there were an awful lot of hangers-on who were getting the benefits of being the royal family and not really doing much. But the public does expect, royals to turn up. Charities find that if they're involved, they raise more money. And there are not enough royals of the right generation to go around. The thing is, we've seen one generation sort of move out, the Gloucesters and the Kents, and others are now in their 80s. The king and his sister and the queen are in their 70s. So we're then jumping to the next generation, which is really only it's only Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. And without Fergie and Andrew, that makes that generation difficult. And then the next generation down, there's really only the Prince and Princess of Wales. You haven't got Prince Harry, and the others are too young. And to be fair to them, they've got their own careers, they've got their own families. The last thing a lot of them want to do is to go out and open up, shops and hospitals and give speeches. So I think we've got to change our expectations. Rather than have more of them on the balcony. I don't mind them on the balcony. It's quite interesting to see who's there, who's in and out. But I think people were thinking the cost, for example, of security were just not being justified.
Do you think we are getting towards the end of the royals?
No, I think they're great survivors. We have, in a sense, 2 generations to go. Who knows when that might happen, but George looks like, perfectly nice boy, well-trained. Support for the monarchy hasn't really dipped dramatically. There's quite a lot of sympathy for them at the moment. I think the king particularly has played things very well. I think Princess of Wales is extremely popular. And now with the statement about the state of her health, I suspect that, apart from a few odd people, that's a closed matter and that will be the end of it until she's ready to do more public duties. But it does show the vulnerabilities, that it just needs a couple of key people to get ill. And there's a lot of pressure on others.
It's extraordinary how popular they are, though, or at least how interested the world is in them. You almost get this sort of double speak from people when you travel around the world. Americans, how is it? Why is everybody interested in this family? Who cares about? And yet they dominate the headlines in most countries, or most English-speaking countries around the world, just when one of them's ill or something like that.
Well, a lot of them, most of them do a terrific job. I think they have a common touch. It brings the nation together. I think most monarchies are slightly more stable than other countries with presidents. And I think people, think that monarchy is a good thing, and it's just important that we have the right people as the monarchs. And the problem is occasionally bad apples are thrown up, and the royal family has become more ruthless about dealing with them, as we've seen with both Andrew and Harry.
Yeah, well, with Andrew, are you still writing or researching a book on him?
Yes, my book on Andrew and Fergie should be out next year. And it's very much a dual portrait. I mean, I think she's very much involved with all aspects of his life. People say that they'll remarry. I don't think that's true at all. But she has the best of both worlds. She's linked to him. She lives in Royal Lodge. She gets the benefits of royal cooks and, of course, status. And yet she's free to do what she wants, which is to make lots of money, which she's been continuing to do. And this is one of the things I'm looking at, how that money's made. Is it made trading on her royal status? Is it abusing her position as a charity patron in order to make connections to further her business interests? So that's very much the focus of the book.
Interesting. Okay, and as you say, you started to feel that some of the real issues with Andrew were related to his work as a trade envoy.
Yeah, I mean, there are controversies all the way through his life, and as you say, he's extremely rude to people, very self-important, not very self-aware, a bully, a bore, not very bright. But, I have had some stories with him being quite effective as a trade envoy and showing kindnesses to people, and he has clearly a group of friends. So there's another side there. But, he's always been very different in terms of his character to his siblings. But the story will focus, I think, on those years as a trade envoy.
What does it mean to be a trade envoy exactly? Just a lay person?
Well, they had the Duke of Kent, who was basically sent out to drum up trade for Britain. He would lead delegations abroad with bankers and various businessmen. And the idea was to fly the flag for Britain. Royals, clearly, particularly in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, carry a certain amount of weight. They can do things that perhaps politicians or celebrities can't do. It's a much more long-term relationship. And the idea was that Andrew, when he left the Navy in 2001, would take on this role and champion trade in the way he championed startup businesses with his pitch at the Palace. But I think very quickly there was a suspicion that he was using this government-paid or taxpayer-paid role not so much for promoting British trade, but promoting himself. He was bringing along people, for example, who had bankrolled him and his wife, rather cozy relationships with, particularly with a man called David Rowland, who ran a bank for very rich people. And I think one of the things that worries me is that there's no record, certainly no record that's being made public of who was accompanying him on these trips, because normally we would have that information, and we would be able to ask why were they there. I think one of the other concerning things is he didn't always stay in the embassy. He stayed in 5-star hotels, away from the ambassador, where he could perhaps do business separately. I'm certainly talking to some of the people the ambassadors. He was asking to see people who were not on the agenda in terms of helping British trade, but he was keen to meet them. And you have to ask why, on whose behalf was he meeting them? Wasn't the British taxpayer. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, and we're not getting answers. I'm told on one hand that any papers related to Prince Andrew are closed until 2065. When he would be 105 years old. The Department of Trade claim they have no record of this 10 years of activity. The Foreign Office have nothing. Cabinet Office have nothing. So what's happened to these papers? They should, by law, be in the National Archives. Why have they disappeared? Again, contacts of mine in the Department of Trade has said that the internal computer has had everything connected with Prince Andrew wiped from it, so that no one can even internally access stuff. And that I've discovered that almost everyone who deals with either Andrew or Fergie has signed non-disclosure agreements. Now, why should you need to sign those if you are not doing anything that you're ashamed of?
Oof. So what do you imagine, Mike? I mean, I guess we can only speculate. What kinds of things would he be hiding? And when you say he's working for himself more than for us?
Well, we know from various court cases that he appears to have been acting as a fixer for various people, taking a commission for introducing people. Fergie certainly openly acts as a brand ambassador. There's a man called Johnny Hon, who's a businessman in Hong Kong and here, who's paid her large sums of money, and her daughters, and Zara and Peter Phillips, basically for introductions and to have photos taken with him, which he uses clearly to promote his businesses. She's involved with a failing venture called Gate Ventures, which has a lot of Chinese investors who put money in. That money then was used to help start up one of Fergie's businesses, and hasn't really done what it was meant to, what the investors thought it was meant to do, which was to invest in theatre and film. We've had a recent case in the High Court, and as I say, this is how often we learn these things, from a man called Salman Turk, who was basically charged with fraud. A Turkish businesswoman gave him large sums of money, which he needed to get out of Turkey and which he was meant to invest. Now, over £1 million of this was paid to the Duke and Duchess of York and one of their daughters. They haven't explained what this money was for. When I interviewed Salman Turk, he said it was money for a party, it was money for as a birthday present or a wedding present. You don't give large sums of money like that to people you don't know. The woman thought that she was paying this money to Prince Andrew because he'd got her a passport. Well, I don't think he did, and he shouldn't be able to. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of money flying around with people not giving proper explanations for it. My own research suggests that Salman Turk is involved as a middleman, and this is a way of getting money to the Yorks from people that they've done business with.
Wow. Are they ever litigious with, if you speculate these things? I know you've done your research. Would they ever come out and go, Andrew Lownie, we're taking you down?
Well, I'm sure I'll get rude letters, and I'm sure the book will have to be read very carefully. But I'm very happy to respond to them, because I'm, collecting chapter and verse. This would only make the problem bigger for them. It would just become more public. I think what they're trying to do is shut this thing down and make it go quiet. So in the Salman Turk thing, for example, the press were very careful to say there's no accusation of wrongdoing by the Duke and Duchess of York. But even the judge himself expressed surprise at what was, what this money was for, that they'd been paid.
Wow. Because Harry and Meghan are quite litigious, aren't they? But I don't know if I've seen that Andrew going around.
No, Andrew and Fergie have not. Well, Fergie has tried to sue. I suppose the most famous case is just over a decade ago. She was caught in a sting by the News of the World, offering access to Andrew for $500,000. And in fact took £5,000 and took £40,000 as a down payment. And this was filmed on camera with her saying, basically, you give me the money and I'll give you access to Andrew, and we can do some business. And this was a sort of fake shake businessman.
Is that illegal or immoral?
Well, she said that she had been entrapped, but the fact is that this story was going around that she was offering access. This is why they set up the sting.
But to do that itself, to offer access to Andrew, is that something that shouldn't be happening because it's immoral?
Well, we don't pay the royal family to feather their own nests, and though she would say she's not a member of the royal family, she has all the perks of being a member. She uses her title, and that's what people assume.
Yeah.
So, yes, he's abusing his position as a royal. They're there, to do good deeds, not to make money for themselves from their position.
Yeah.
So, but she did.
Meghan Markle.
But she did try and sue the fake sheikh, and she abandoned the case. I think she realized that she really hadn't got a leg to stand on. So time and time again, people have threatened to sue her, not so much for libel, but for not just paying her bills. And these cases have gone to the High Court. It's a famous case of someone who'd lent her £100,000 to pay for a summer holiday, and she only gave her £5,000 back and claimed that she thought it was a present. Now, why she should expect people to give her money to support her holiday lifestyle is one question. But the other question is, why are people doing this? What are they hoping to get from giving this money to her?
So they gave money to her expecting to get some back?
Well, the idea was, according to the woman who lent the money, who's now married to the Duke of Marlborough, or the former Duke of Marlborough, she expected to have this loan paid back. Fergie's line was she thought it was a gift.
Are they out of money then? They're just sort of loaning?
Well, they go through money, at a fantastic rate. They live a jet style lifestyle. Again, they very rarely have to pay for things. People give them the use of private jets. People pick up the tab when they go to hotels, when they go on holiday, the hoteliers pay. At one point, one of the daughters described British Airways as our airline. They travel always business or first class, often upgraded. when they could easily afford to buy it. And they just live, a completely different life to most of us. Of course, they have very, very rich friends. I don't think it's a coincidence. They're often on Abramovich's yacht or going to stay with Richard Branson. It's a completely different world. So on one hand, they're pretending to be just like you and me and one of the people. And the next, they're living the jet set lifestyle paid for generally by someone else. And I think the big question, again, with Andrew is, again, Sunning Hill, the house that was given to him as a wedding present by his mother, which they then sold for about £6 million more than the asking price, or that it was worth, and £3 million more than the asking price, to one of the people that he was doing business with. This just seems, on the face of it, to be someone repaying a favour. Could they afford a £13 million ski chalet? His only income was as a naval officer and £250,000 a year from his mother to do his royal duties. So, money was given to him in trust funds, probably when he was born, certainly probably when he got married. But we don't know any of this. Royal wills, even the most minor royals, are closed. We can't see how much money is passed on. They're basically saved from paying inheritance tax. They clearly have very good financial advice. But again, the big question is, what are gifts and what as them as individuals, and what are gifts to them as members of the royal family? And for example, all the files in the National Archives, the ones that exist, which talk about gifts to the royal family, those remain closed. Time and time again, we hear of stories of gifts being given to them, particularly by Middle Eastern individuals, which they then sell on quietly in auctions. Fergie had a room at Sunning Hill called Aladdin's Cave, where they put all this stuff. But, is this given to them because they're Mr. Joe Public, or is it given to them because they're members of the royal family? And there was at one point an attempt by mainly Labour MPs to set up a register of business interests in the way that members of the House of Lords and Commons must declare earnings and gifts. And that's never really been put through. But I think we've reached a point where, in order to maintain trust in the institution and the individuals, there should be that register.
Yeah. Do you think the police, when there are issues of fraud or the Epstein Island stuff, do the police turn a blind eye to royals, with Prince Andrew in particular?
Well, that's the feeling, and people like Norman Baker feel that, and a man called Di Davis, who was former head of Royal Security, feels that. I think the thing is, the police will say that they've investigated and that there was no case to answer. They'll say with Virginia Giuffre, well, she wasn't underage here, the offences took place abroad. But, there was, Channel 4 looked into this, there were people who came forward in this country, there were offences committed here, and they were not really investigated. The police don't go there. We have the famous case with the Paul Burrell, who was actually put on trial for stealing from Diana, and at the last minute, when they realised he might begin to spill some secrets, the Queen remembered that she had agreed that he could take her underwear and keep them for safekeeping and stuff, which we all knew was completely untrue. And she did that right at the last minute when Burrell threatened to reveal some of the family secrets.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know there were accusers of Andrew here. Is that unrelated to Epstein?
I think it's connected with Epstein, and I think Channel 4 is still looking at that story, so it's probably better I don't say anything more. But I understand that there is more to the Epstein story than has come out.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how I can prod you for more without
well, when the book comes out, when the book comes out next year,
comes out, that's going to be big. We'll have to get you on at the time as well. That'll be.
I can say more when the book comes out.
That'll be explosive. What are some of the mad demands? I saw some articles online about the mad demands that Andrew's made while on these trade envoy missions, but they didn't seem that mad to me, actually. It was like in the titles, it was like he wants room temperature water and an ironing board that's 6 foot long, and I thought, that doesn't seem that mad, actually. What do you think of that?
Well, that was the man called Simon Wilson who was deputy ambassador in Bahrain. I think we don't know what the demands are because they're refusing to say. It's one of the questions I put in. But I think he was quite pedantic about stuff that he wanted, I mean, which most guests wouldn't. Certainly one of the demands I got from one of the diplomats was he said, can you line up some blondes for me?
Oh, I can't ask that.
The diplomat said, I'm not a pimp. So it wasn't just having the tea at the right temperature, but he had a sort of crested teapot he would bring round. He had a valet who travelled with him with this ironing board. You would think that there would be staff and an ironing board at some of the 5-star hotels he stays in, because this, of course, is all paid for by us. And at the time, huge costs of paying for bodyguards who had to travel with him in first class and stay in these hotels. Funny enough, he went with his ironing board to one of his girlfriends in the States, and she said, I didn't realize you were a surfer. And he had to admit that actually this was an ironing board, not a surfboard.